Welcome back. Today we are going to do some built-in middleware in ASP.NET Core. We are going to see, and the purpose of this tutorial are the following. It will demonstrate the middleware chaining in an HTTP request response pipeline, and it will show that the path of travel of the request is reversed on the return cycle through a chain of middleware, and it will show the use developer exception page middleware in action and how the developer exception page looks like on the browser when an exception is encountered. It will also show the use file server middleware and express its usage to allow as a static file server. The static file means all files like HTML, images, CSS and JavaScript files. These are static files, as well as how it is configured in code, this use file server middleware, to serve a default static file, and finally express how it could be used for directory browsing service. That is, it could act as a directory browsing service to list the folder and files in a specific directory. Right. So yesterday in our first lecture on middleware, so that was the previous lecture. So if you haven't gone through this that lecture, I strongly recommend that you do so, because that had built the basics concepts of middleware. So I won't be covering that. So I'll just cover what I have just told as the outcome of this tutorial. So going back to our middleware demo project on Visual Studio, yesterday we have left at this point in the startup file, startup.cs. Now we have seen that this configure method is which configures, we use this method to configure the HTTP request pipeline, right? So herein all the your built-in middleware of ASP.NET Core framework are getting called, or you can write your custom middleware. Now I have actually intentionally kept this block of code: if environment.isDevelopment app.useDeveloper exception page. Now we'll cover that in a bit more detail. So now yesterday we were at this stage that we have used this use extension method on this app object, and we have created now all these middlewares are request delegates. Okay, so delegates are nothing but anonymous functions, So there in this async delegate, it accepts two parameters: context and next. Okay, so context is HTTP context, and next is another parameter, func task next. Now how do I get this? The thing is, if you look into the argument for this configure method, it has got app is of application builder type. So if you go to the definition of how the application builder looks like, it has got a request delegate. Okay, request delegate object. Now this request delegate is, if you look into the definition, now this is a public delegate. Okay, that's a request delegate, and it accepts a HTTP context object. So we are now going back to the code that we have started. So this has got a context object. Okay, now we have seen that how we can chain two middleware. That is, one middleware was writing to the browser in an asynchronous way, because it's all asynchronous programming. So hello from middleware 1, and then it was chaining, it was calling the next middleware in the line, and this one was writing hello from middleware 2. Okay, so just quickly I will show you again. So hello from middleware 1, hello from middleware 2. So basically what happens is that, this order is important. So this is in this order. The first in the request response pipeline, this middleware 1 is encountered first, and then it passes on to, it does some processing. In this case, it is writing asynchronously on the browser hello from middleware 1, and then passes it to the next middleware. Now this one, it doesn't have a next parameter or next.invoke. So here it gets terminated and the direction of the pipeline is reversed. Now reversed means this will actually travel in the opposite direction for delivering a response. So first from middleware 1 to middleware 2, and then from 2 to back to 1 before getting the response. Now here I would like to show you one thing, because what we have just talked about in the slideshow, that I wish to demonstrate the middleware chaining, which I have already shown, to show that the path of the travel of the request is reversed on the return cycle. Okay, so let's go to that part. And okay, so for that I will do a bit of a change, and I will write a bit of a code. Okay, so that code will be here, instead of hello from middleware 1, what I will write is incoming request. Okay, from middleware 1, right? And then call the next.invoke or next parameter. Now this is doing the same thing. Next.invoke will do the same thing as writing next with a await next with a empty pair of brackets. So this will exactly do the same thing. Okay, so that's a new thing that we learned. So we'll get by with the next as a method directly rather than next.invoke. And then what I will do next is await. I'll just copy this part and paste it over here, change the message, and this message will be outgoing response. This was incoming request from middleware 1, and then I passed it on to the next, which is the middleware 2. And now I will be showing how the once it is getting terminated, it changes the direction, course of it reverses the middleware passage of the request from request stream to the response stream. It reverses. Okay, so this will be outgoing request from middleware 1, outgoing response rather. Okay, and similarly here this will be, I'll just copy this part, copy and highlight this part, and this will be incoming request from middleware 2, right? And then copy again this and change the string, change the message. So await context.response.write async outgoing response from middleware 2, right? So here it gets terminated because it doesn't have this next method coming in. So it gets, the middleware direction gets reversed. That's what I want to show. The incoming request now it will get traveling to give you the response in the reverse direction. So let's run this application. Okay, so here you go. Incoming request from middleware 1, and then incoming request from middleware 2, outgoing response from middleware 2. Now this you can see that incoming request from middleware 1 was getting transmitted to middleware 2, and then outgoing, while outgoing it has reversed. So it has started from middleware 2 and after that outgoing response from middleware 1. So this actually ties with my slideshow that I created yesterday, which was this one. Okay, so request was passing through the middleware 1. There was some logic and it was then going to the middleware 2. There was some logic and it was then going to middleware 3. And then it was a terminal middleware. It was terminating. It was not pointing to any next middleware in the pipeline. So it was not reversing the direction. So that's what I wanted to show. And I have shown you these two things. Now, next I will show the use of the use developer exception page middleware in action and how the developer exception page looks like on the browser when an exception is encountered. For that, again, we come back to the this one, our code, and we are still again on the startup file, startup class on the middleware demo project. Now here, in order to show the developer exception page, I will actually write something like, I will have to throw a new exception. Okay, so here you can, I don't need to show the second middleware, so I'll just comment it out, and let's say that incoming, I can write a throw new exception. Here, throw new exception. An error has occurred, so be patient. Right. Let's see if it throws this exception and shows the use developer exception page. So I would expect that this code needs to be uncommented, so it will be active again. So this is uncommented. Now let's see, run the application. Yeah, so this is the exception page, and it says that the exception and error has occurred to, so be patient and throw new exception and error has occurred. So this is what my customized comment was, and you see there are 4 tabs: query, cookies, and headers. So if there is no query string data, there will be it will show. And but if you create a query string data, say count equals 5, let's say so count 5. Okay, so whatever the query string data that you pass, that will be shown in the query tab. So cookies ASP.ASP.NET.consent, yes, headers, these are the header. Right. Next is, we'll get back to the code again. middleware. Now we have seen that exception page. Now here in the use developer exception page, how it looks like, how this developer exception page looks like, or what is the definition to the class. So developer exception page uses iApplication Builder again. Okay, so this iApplication Builder, what does it have? It's an extension class. Okay, so these are extension methods. Go to definition. It's again request delegate, but I will be more interested in this part, developer exception page options. Okay, so go to the definition again. Now developer exception page options, this class, this has got a source code line count method. Okay, that returns a source code line count, returns an integer, determines how many lines of code to include before and after the lines of code. So I can use this developer exception page options here. So now here this will only work if we are working in the development environment. If the environment is development, only this developer exception page will work. Okay, so developer exception page options, that's a class, and that has got, if you go to the definition, it has got a int of type int. It has got a method source code line count, right? So we'll make use of that. So I've got an object of developer exception page options, and options, that options instance dot source code line count. Let me fix it to be 10. Okay, and pass this options object to here, app dot use developer exception page with options, because earlier we have seen that it takes an overload which is of a type developer exception page options. Now run this application. Remember, the source code line count is 10 this time. Now if you expand this line, you see there are approximately 10 lines above this exception and below this, 10 lines below this. So if you just keep that browser open, let me make this assignment as 5, build the solution, and then refresh the browser. Now here you can see that source code line count equals 5. Okay, so there are 5 lines below this approximately. All right, so next what we'll do is, if we go to this slideshow, we have seen use developer exception page middleware in action, and how the developer exception page looks like on the browser when an exception is encountered. So next is, I will show you the use file server middleware and express its usage to allow as a static file server. What is a static file? Static files are of HTML, images, CSS and JavaScript file, as well as, now this use file server middleware is also configured in code to serve as a default static file and serve a default static file, and finally express how it could be used for directory browsing service to list that folders files in a specific directory. Okay, so coming back to the code here, just stop this application. Okay, so I'll keep this, and then I'll use the app instance, app dot use file server, use file server. So these are all middlewares. Now just, I think you have noticed by this time that all these middlewares, the built-in middleware for this app instance, they have a use prepended with them, the word use file server. Okay, like it was use developer exception page. Now if you look into, just quickly to check what I'm saying, dot, so everything is use file server, use Facebook authentication, use Google authentication, use health checks, all are these middlewares. Okay, middlewares. So here app.use file server. Now in order for the file server to fetch static contents or static files, there is a condition. That condition is that you need to have a www root, a folder named www root within the project, root, under the project root. So this directory I had made because it was an empty project. There was no folder when it was first created. So I've created a www root, and I have created a test. I have placed two files, you can see, but this at the moment, I'll tell you the purpose. Now let us get this index.html file. I will just exclude from the project, and then see the startup class, use file server. Let's see what happens. Okay. So I am the home page. Now this home page actually comes from the set page, that was the index page. Even though this index page I have actually excluded, but it was still caching up. So in order to change the default page, let's do one thing. So Control F5 once again. If we refresh, it is still showing I am the home page. Okay. So if you click on test.html, it changes to the test.html page, which says that I am the static file with the h2 heading. And that is the, if you just look into the test.html, that is what it says. I am the static file within h2 heading. So what needs to be done to make this test.html page as a default page? For this to work, now use file server also has an file server options class it uses. So if you look into the definition of use file server, so this use file server has got file server options. Okay, and if you go to the definition of file server options, it has got enable directory browsing, which returns a bool. If you say true, it will enable directory browsing, and it has got default files options. Default file option, it's a public property. So you just remember this default files option. So I'll make a similar type of code as it is here. Default file options, I will instance a class default files options, default files equals new default file options. This should be file server options. Okay, so we started from this point. Save file server options. Okay, Right, and then on this object file server options, I'll call file server options dot file server options dot default file options dot default file names dot clear. I will call the clear method to clear out the cache, and then file server options dot default file options dot default file names and dot add. This time I'm gonna add a string which is the test.html. Now test.html, and then run this after putting the argument file server options onto the app.useFileServer, and then running the application. Okay, now this is the static file. Even though the URL doesn't show this localhost /localhost:/port number /test.html, in essence this is redirecting the localhost to the test.html whenever it encounters a static file. So by default the static file to be fetched is test.html. Okay, so now if you make it index.html and bring this index.html again within the project, including the project, okay, and then come to the startup class and then run the application. And then cache, it was cached, so I am the home page. So it is changed. The default file is now HTML, index.html. So that is the end of today's tutorial. Now what we have done is, again, a quick recap is we have demonstrated the middleware chaining in the HTTP request response pipeline. We have shown that the path of the travel of the request is reversed on the return cycle through a chain of middleware. We have actually shown the use developer exception page middleware in action and how the developer exception page looks like on the browser when an exception is encountered, and we have shown how the use file server middleware works and express its usage to allow as a static file server, as well as how it is configured in code to serve as a default static file, and finally express how it could be used for directory browsing service. So that's it.